Welcome to Real Film Reviewed, the show that delivers short spoiler-free reviews of films, TV shows, and limited series, followed by a deep dive discussion. I'm Chris Cheney, and this is Real Film Reviewed. Welcome back to Real Film Reviewed. Tonight I'm officially kicking off horror review season with Netflix's new horror, No One Gets Out Alive. I won't only be reviewing horror films this month. I thought about it, but I don't want to leave out the great ones that are coming out simply because they're not horror. But I will promise at least one horror review each week this month. So let's get into the spoiler-free review. An immigrant woman travels to the U.S. after her mother dies to pursue a new life, and while waiting for a job interview, she is forced to take a room at a nightmarish boarding house. Once there, she realizes she may never get out. So I only recognized and knew Marc Menchaca, who played one of the Langmores in Ozark, the television series on Netflix, but most of the main cast was relatively unknown in the U.S. This was another semi-foreign independent film, so much of the cast is most likely known in the UK. The filming locations were in Cleveland, Ohio and Bucharest, Romania, so there were some clear references to the locations in the film that are relevant to the story. This film was definitely interesting. While the plot sounds basic, the action in it certainly was not. It is primarily set in a house that looks condemned with 2 male workers and all women guests. So this struck me as odd. Typically with women-only places, men are not allowed in at night, only during the day for things like repairs and deliveries and things like that, but they actually lived in this house too. I would not call this film scary. While there were some chilling moments and a couple of pop-up scares, overall it wasn't very scary. It wasn't really a jumpy horror movie either. I would say it was more a gross horror movie and not the gory kind either. It's interesting. I won't reveal too much about what made the film horror and what in fact is the reason no one gets out alive. That was a reference to the title of the film, not a spoiler. Bringing this to my real review, 3 stars. As stated earlier, this was a fairly basic horror plotline, no twists, haunted house. It was pretty short, so there was not a whole lot of time for backstory or character development. If you're looking for a short horror flick that's decent to watch, this is a decent mini dose of horror. No One Gets Out Alive was released in 2021 and was directed by Santiago Menghini. It was based on a novel written by Adam Neville, and it stars Christina Rodlo, Victoria Alcock, Marc Menchaca, and David Figlioli. It is rated R and has a runtime of 1 hour and 25 minutes. It can be viewed on the one and only Netflix. Here is the spoiler alert warning. After this point, I will discuss this film more in depth, potentially and likely including spoilers. Thank you for listening to the spoiler-free review. We'll be back after a word about our sponsors. Alright, here is the spoiler alert warning. Those new to Real Film Reviewed, after this point I will discuss this review further, potentially and likely revealing spoilers. Thank you for listening to the spoiler-free review. I'll be back after a word about my sponsors. Enjoying Real Film Reviewed? Ever thought about making a podcast of your own? When I started, I didn't know anything about podcasting or making an internet show. Luckily, I found Anchor. And I'm cheap, so cost was very important to me. Anchor is 100% free, and it's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. The creation tools allow you to edit and record your podcast right from your phone or your computer. My first few episodes were recorded right on my phone, and the process was super simple and fun. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on multiple listening apps like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You get notified whenever you're added to a new listening app, and I've lost count on how many there are. Speaking as someone who tried multiple platforms, I can honestly tell you, Anchor helped me easily fall in love with podcasting, and I've recorded every single week since. So stop hesitating, start having fun, and start your podcast right now. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome back, everyone. So now we're going to dive into this film a little bit deeper. As I mentioned, it was pretty short. I didn't mean to dump on it in the short review. I did like it. It was just a really basic concept, and then it kind of gets crazy right at the end, and then all of a sudden you realize it's over, and it's kind of weird. So kind of getting into it, there's not really much of a backstory. Like I mentioned, all we really know about Ambar is that her mom dies, and then she leaves her mom in, I believe it was Mexico that she came from. from, but I'm not 100% certain. I believe it was referenced once at the beginning. But she comes to Ohio and she's working at some little sewing factory, which is kind of interesting because it looks like she's in a foreign country in a sweatshop, but she's actually in some place in Ohio. And she's working there while she gets this little connect with her uncle or slash cousin. Her mom was his cousin, and she calls him her uncle, but I guess he's really her cousin. So yeah, anyway, he's supposedly only going to help her because she was born in the United States. He said if she's an illegal immigrant, he can't do anything to help her, but because she was like, oh no, I was born here. You know, she said that she was born in Texas. So that's kind of the first thing. So she's adamant about getting a Texas ID and Texas information, but her, you know, she's the ID and stuff that she's wanting her to get is that her friend is trying to give her is an Ohio ID. And she's like, no, it has to be Texas. And I'm like, okay, I can understand if your birth certificate, you know, needed to be Texas, but I didn't really understand what the significance of the ID needing to be Texas over Ohio. She could have been born in Texas and moved back, you know, so that was a little bit that was unclear to me. And to clarify what I'm talking about, her uncle slash cousin specifically says, make sure you bring your ID. They're big on that. So we know that they're asking for an ID. I really just didn't understand that part. And he's not even going to see it. It was going to be somebody that she was interviewing with. So there was a couple of little things like that jumped out at me. Stuff like that kind of annoys me in movies. So I don't know. I just have a particular thing for those types of random pieces that are added to movies that are supposed to make it more realistic, but it just sounds stupid. So, but you know, it wasn't that bad. It was a small thing. Her friend appears to be nice, but we don't, I mean, other than working at this factory, we don't really know her relationship with her friend. I think her name was Kinsey, and she works with her in this little sewing factory. But outside of that, you know, they have some drinks. We don't really know how close she is. We do know that she, you know, knows that she's an illegal immigrant, but we don't necessarily really know the extent of their relationship before they work together in this little factory. So they go out and have drinks. Kinsey talks to her about papers that she can get. Long story short, Kinsey says that she'll loan her the rest of the money, and that she said, when you have a chance, just give me the money you have. And so Amber gives her the money on the spot, and we never see Kinsey again after that. So at this point of the film, that's when Amber kind of starts panicking, and this forces her back to the house. So she leaves the house because she gets freaked out, and then, like we saw, she goes in the shower and she hears this woman screaming, and she hears panting at first. And I was that was creepy. I will say that. Before she leaves the house and she takes the shower, you can hear the panting from underneath the drain. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what I would think about that if I was in the shower and I didn't understand why she was still in the shower after hearing this panting. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'd be super out, and I would have left at the same exact time she did. But that was one thing that I noticed, was that she got out of the house. She didn't have a reason to go back to the house. So I'm trying to figure out why she was going back if she was so terrified of it. But Kinsey takes her money, and the guy tells her that he's going to give her her little deposit back for the boarding house. So then she goes back and gets the money, and I didn't understand what was the relevance of, like, I wouldn't have even gone back in the house. Like, your money is in your room. Like, no, that sounds like a trap. So it was a little bit, you know, like, well, why would you go back into the house? Well, why wouldn't he just go and bring, like, why would it be on your bed? You know, it was just random. Clearly she had moved out. She had taken her stuff and she was out. So it was just the stuff that they put together didn't necessarily make sense, but it wasn't too awful. You know, it didn't throw you off or throw you out of the story too much. It was just kind of like, okay, well, that wasn't really necessary, or was there a different way that this could have gone? But anyways, the brothers, this movie is kind of like a House of Wax type thing. So the two men that live in the house are the brothers, and all we really know about one of the brothers, Becker, is that he's sick in some way. And I guess what we're supposed to learn at the end of this movie is that he's not sick, he's actually possessed. And I didn't understand why or how. There's no description. You know how in some movies there's some historian or some religious figure, somebody that they can reach out to that will explain a little bit about what's going on, provide some kind of a backstory or something like that. But there was nobody to provide any help in this situation. So we're left to a lot of assumptions about this mysterious box that's in this house. And that's really all that we see, is just this box that opens up, and it's described in some descriptions that you can see of the film as as Pandora's box, but that's not referenced at any point in the film. So for me, I was just kind of like, okay, well, what's in the box? So that was kind of my thinking of it. I'm like, all right, so are we going to learn about what this box is, where it came from? We see a small little snippet in the beginning, and that's really it. So finally, she gets back in the house. She gets kidnapped right away. There's no back and forth. It's just immediately into the danger. They take her. He takes her downstairs, and he covers her in like this, I guess it's not dust. It's like particle board dust, like when buildings come down, it's like that kind of stuff. So and he covers her in it. That part I didn't get either. That's not explained really in the film either. I know that there's a lot of like butterflies and moths and stuff like that, but I'm not really understanding what the relevance is to it might be ash also. That's kind of what it looks like, but it does, it's what it's supposed, it could just be what it's supposed to resemble. It's not really what it looks like on her skin. It is gray, but I'm just like, what's the significance of that? Becker comes upstairs. He's got like blood on his hands, and then he puts his hand on her and takes her downstairs. So what the hell? At this point, we see this hand moth insect thing, but it's like a mummy. So I have no idea what this thing is. It's got two big arms that are like human arms, and then it's got this centerpiece that's like a bug. It has like a body of like a bee or like a roach, kind of body. And then it's got a mummified corpse on top of it. And then the center in between the two arm pieces, there's not really a head. It's this like opening, I guess I'll say, and then these hands come out of the opening and it rips heads off. Totally random. Who thinks of that? And I'm gonna go ahead and say it, the way that it looks when the head comes off and the hands come down, it's just really odd. It looks like somebody's hovering over a toilet seat, and it's just I don't really understand what the description is supposed to, what is the image, what are we supposed to be seeing and feeling. And then at the end of this film, we know that Red, who was the other brother that rented out the room to Ambar in the beginning, is, crippled on the floor because she comes out wailing and attacking because she ends up getting free for whatever reason. She overcomes her little nightmare that she's having. Supposedly that's caused by whatever entity this is. Again, a lot of things left to assumptions. So when he opens up the box, she immediately goes into dream state, and it's just really odd. Her mother's in the hospital, and she has to say no to her mother, and she suffocates her, and she ends up breaking free. The monster goes back in. So I'm assuming those that are able to break free in the visions that it's giving them, those are the ones that it lets live. And those are the ones that end up bringing more bodies to it. Again, assuming that's what happened to Becker. So after she breaks free, she attacks both Red and Becker, and she beats Becker to death. Red ends up getting injured in this, and at the end, she drags him to this thing, puts him on the table, and this thing bites his head off, and then she kind of just watches for a second, walks back up to the front of the house, and her ankle was broken from all of this going on, and she straightens it, and I'm like, okay, so is she the thing? I don't understand what's going on right now. Is she one of the ghosts? And that's the other thing. We see these random ghosts in the house, and one of them is called Mary, and one of them we actually don't know the name of, but she's like a younger girl. So that I don't understand what that was either. Are these the souls of the people that this thing was eating this whole time in this house? There was a whole lot of confusion. We were just kind of along for the ride. So it's a nice little ride if you don't really want to know anything about it. It was just kind of different. And that thing at the end was just kind of different. And there's no explanation of it. It just goes back into the box, and she goes up the stairs and looks out, and it ends. And I was kind of like, okay. That's interesting. That'll be a short review for me. So cool. Make my job easy. I did enjoy it. It was different. And it appeared to be, before it ended, it was kind of like the first time I saw it. Movie was just really, really good. And then when you get to the end, you see it's just a giant spider, and you're like, oh, okay. Awesome. But yeah, this one wasn't necessarily super good all the way through. It was fairly decent. So 3 stars. Thank you for listening, everyone. Catch you next time. Thanks for listening to Real Film Reviewed. Before I go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen. Make sure to join the Real Film Reviewed Discord if you haven't already, where we break down this episode further in post-show text channels. Follow Real Film Reviewed on Twitter at RealFilmPKC. Check out the online store, Real Merch, to pick up some gear to represent. Happy watching, everyone.